Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about the integrated combination of workforce innovation and workplace strategy, and the change management required to implement plans fully to transform updated designs into effective new flow and behaviors. In 2024, the focus must be on holistic understanding of all work activities creating value for your business and detailed appreciation of their interdependent dynamics. What are employees' daily experiences, such as connecting with customers, interacting with team members, learning new skills, in, on, and across their different workspaces and interfaces? What are the key levers, such as increased autonomy, that have disproportionate positive impact? Do you have a head of hybrid or remote to manage the change, leading the training, facilitating team agreements for flexible arrangements, and refining strategic workplace solutions? I'm delighted to be speaking with Phil Kirschner, Senior Expert and Associate Partner, Real Estate and People and Organizational Performance at McKinsey. Phil advises executive teams on the future of work, employee experience, organizational health, and post-pandemic workplace strategies. He has 20 years of experience in leading and influencing complex change initiatives across various disciplines and industries. Hi, Phil. How are you?
I'm really great. How are you?
I am very well, thank you, and very excited for a wide-ranging conversation. And I start at the beginning. You were working at Credit Suisse. You were looking at efficiencies in many different ways and got into workplace efficiency, workplace strategies. How did that evolve?
Yeah, I usually say I'm an accidental workplace strategist. It's the term I've been applying for the past 14 years. As you said, I had a long career at Credit Suisse that started far away from real estate and technology, then got involved in the efficiency management group. So looking at sort of supply and demand of every kind of cost you can imagine. When I started that, I was only looking at sort of consulting and third-party services spend. So again, not real estate, but was in the right place at the right time when the CFO of the bank at the time had received a consulting report sort of advising about the challenges facing the bank and other banks with our workplace. So it's emptier than you think. You've got maybe talent looking elsewhere and not necessarily banks, but they're looking at technology firms and what's going on in the really amenity-rich workplace war there. And people probably aren't as satisfied with their day-to-day office experience as you think they are. Therefore, you have an opportunity. And the interesting thing that happened at the time was that the real estate group itself wasn't as sort of change positive about new ways of working, activity-based design, and desk sharing, and all these concepts. And so it was the efficiency management group that was also part of the finance organization with real estate that really took up the helm and said, we'll give this a try because there's a significant potential cost saving here if you can add 30 or 40% more people to a given building or avoid building a new building, whatever the lever is. But understood that there was a significant amount of change management that had to be done in order to achieve that efficiency. And the head of that group at the time was really into the idea, rolled up his sleeves and put together a pilot team to explore the idea with mostly people that didn't have real estate or workplace backgrounds. And I was one of them.
The driver was we have an opportunity to change people's experiences for the better. That isn't necessarily an attitude that I would say is associated with large banks. Was there a pain point? Was it competition with the other banks? Was there a particular revenue, profit, other cost-related driver?
To the mainstream media, the only thing, and like the general public, the only thing they ever heard about in terms of new ways of working or workplace were big, splashy tech campuses, right? Look what Google is doing and Microsoft is doing, Facebook, and like that it was amazing. in how engaging it was to the general public about new ways of thinking, the connection between our office where we spend all day long and the experiences that we have there, and
Mm-hmm.
how magnetic that they can be for talent, which is amazing.
Right.
What I would say to my colleagues and others around sort of financial and professional services, and even life sciences was another industry that was starting to lead this around the same time, was from a talent competition perspective, to my colleagues, I'd say half of the people at this bank are more likely or maybe more desired to go work for Google than for Goldman Sachs.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about what these other companies are doing, but also
Right.
we don't, jokingly, sort of, we don't print money in the way that some of these technology firms do. And
Right.
so our investments are much more focused on the financial products themselves and clients, and we are less likely as an industry to invest in place. But we do, because of like how financially oriented we are, understand like there's a lot of space, and
Mm-hmm.
intuitively understand when presented with the information that people don't necessarily like the place that they sit all day long. And we have this
Right.
huge competitive challenge. So the real kind of hill to climb was, well, we can't let you have your cake and eat it too. When
Okay.
you saw all the pictures of a Google campus or a Microsoft campus,
We're not going to pay for foosball tables.
well, it's not just about not paying for the foosball table. The dirty little secret of those environments that you see in the paper to just colleagues, again, not workplace
Mm-hmm. Sure.
people, I'd say you see the beanbags, you see the beautiful amenities, you see the campus and all that, but all of those workers that you see by and large also have a desk with their name on it, which means
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of two places for everybody. It's very generous.
Right.
And we just don't have the means to do that. That's just not financially viable.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to give you a better experience to solve the kind of productivity issues that you're telling us you have, whether it's focus or lack of technology in meeting rooms or inability to find somebody, we're willing to commit to fixing that. But you have to
Okay.
make a very critical trade with us. Will you give up your assigned seat? That was like the
Oh.
banner recommendation from the consultancies at the time that were pointing out the potential opportunity for doing something differently in a company like the banks, insurance firms, professional services firms,
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, life science. Instead of giving everybody a seat where half of them are empty all the time, why don't you spend a
Right.
little bit more money on the experience of the place? But you will probably have to get them to be willing to share that environment in order to make it nicer.
Right.
And nobody
Okay.
likes to share. That's something we can talk about now. I've learned that over the years. It is a very significant change management challenge to do it. But by and large, the result after years of growing that program, at least at Credit Suisse, were very positive. We're saying in exchange for small incremental, like additions to your day, little bits of friction of having to move around or maybe take something
Mm-hmm.
out of a locker or figure out where you're going to sit for the day. In exchange for that, we can give you access to far more types of places to do your work, greater diversity, greater
Right.
experience, possibly
The
more
activity-based
amenities.
working.
Yeah,
Right.
it was exactly that. And probably the greatest quote we ever got from a leader going through one of the pilot programs early on a video, you would have thought we paid him to say this, was he said, look, I feel like I've lost my office, but I've
Okay.
gained a floor. And that was
Oh.
yeah, it was really wonderful. But that was exactly the point. Most people said, despite the little bits of friction and mostly perceived by the managers that used to have the offices, they would say this is a little harder for me, but almost unilaterally, like my teams find it better for them. Therefore, I will absorb a little bit more of the pain day to day as someone who used to sit in an office to give them a better experience.
And the pain that they were talking about, either qualitatively from research or from anecdotal interactions with these managers, was that more to do with, I want to have my office back because that was a status symbol as well as a home? Or to what extent was it more about the logistics, finding the lockers that you were just describing?
Yeah, a little bit of both. For sure,
Okay.
there's a loss factor there in resistance.
Right.
It is harder to come out of an office if you've achieved it as a status
Right.
symbol and you've
Right.
decorated it in a way that's very difficult to decorate a cubicle, 100%. But even if you take that out of the mix and just say
Right.
someone gets over the hump, or maybe it's a newish manager who really hasn't been in an office very long, if at all. Like in the old world, would have been entitled to one, but now isn't.
Right.
Just the act of sort of becoming a manager, running a department, means that there's definitely a higher general need or perceived need for confidentiality, needing to be in a
Right.
room. So even the managers that were the most willing to play the game, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
would have to move a fair amount, right? Go from the open when they're sitting with their team into a room to be in a different conversation. Maybe
Sure.
sometimes it's, first come, first serve, it's bookable and puts a lot of
Right.
pressure on the design and how smart you are about the
Mm-hmm.
availability of settings and equality of those settings. But so yeah, it was a little extra friction for them.
Okay.
But again, the average sort of employee that never sat in an office and never had access to
Mm-hmm.
confidential space, even if it's just for 10 minutes to, call grandma,
Right.
they were overwhelmingly positive about the ability to do that. And we found from study after study was it very much of like a virtuous cycle. In the parts of these floors or buildings where you had the managers that were genuinely willing to play the game, did their best to be sitting in the open and seen in the open, having calls or conversations in the open, right up until the point where truly they needed to be in a room. Right.
Mm-hmm.
My former boss at the time, who ran real estate strategy, he would sit in the open discussing projects that had real ramifications on staff. Right. Maybe we move an office, close an office, but
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, he was pretty good about like he knows what office he's talking about. The person on the other end of the phone knows what office he's talking about. He just doesn't have to be saying it so out loud. And so for the most part, he could hold back from that demand to go rushing back to the space he used to be entitled for. And if I was there, a level or two below him at the beginning of all this, watching him do that in the open, it really sent a message that like I shouldn't be rushing into a room
Right.
unless I also needed it, either for confidentiality reasons or maybe something's being recorded, right, where the acoustics really mattered. And
Right.
that just set a tone. And the zones, the neighborhoods that had the leaders that really leaned into the change and trying to follow protocols by far were the ones where people would report highest satisfaction, where the different typologies of spaces were available most. The water just sort of moves through the system, and people honestly would also get to meet and interact with new colleagues in a way that we didn't see in the areas where groups were trying to go back to the old way, which may be a little bit prescient for the rest of this conversation, but
Yes.
occupying spaces that were built for this new way of working in a much more static legacy traditional way broke
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the system and caused
Right.
a lot of angst.
Early on, when I was in the workplace flexibility field, it wasn't about the football table. It was about what the football table represented as a manifestation of the culture. I can understand how these employees are responding to that greater transparency. The layers of hierarchy feel reduced, even if they aren't necessarily, but they feel that way. And I feel that I'm closer in many ways to my boss. So I think culturally there was a shift.
Yeah, a huge shift. And again, these are not real estate projects, they're change projects.
Right.
They're culture
Yes.
projects that just happen to manifest in space. A change example for almost anyone going into newer design spaces, activity-based spaces was the lounge. Like, oh, we have a lounge now, we have a community space, but nobody will sit there if they don't think it's okay. If
Oh,
they don't
okay.
see the
Oh,
boss or the
right.
bosses sitting there, not just
Yep.
once, but all the time.
Mm.
And so we would work very hard at the beginning of these projects, the launches, even if it meant corralling their assistants to create meetings and forcing the sort of senior
Yep.
people on the floor to
To
be
set the example.
seen
Right.
in the lounge to set the example.
Yeah.
Because once the flywheel is going, Then you
Yep.
get kind of an environmental norm where for almost any one-on-one meeting of any kind, other than like reviews, right?
Yep.
Instead of bothering to book a room or figure it out, you just say, I'll meet you in the lounge at 2. And everybody
Yep.
goes, great. And not only is that great because it sort of creates this energy and magnetism in the center of gravity of those environments,
Yep.
but again, it eases demand on the formal spaces when you've created a culture that lots of
For
work
sure.
can happen in the open. We don't always have to go rushing for a room. So yeah, again, like virtuous cycle of balancing the supply and demand of the diverse spaces and building a culture that really speaks to the intent of like increasing conversations and getting to know people, sort of feeling of energy in the floor, which makes you want to be there all the time.
Yeah. I did quite a bit of work for Herman Miller, which is where I first learned about activity-based working and how long that has been around and all the research that's been done about all the different ways that we work. It says that way you increased the floor capacity 40% and improved team productivity. How was the bank at that time measuring productivity? I think it was Josh Burson who said 2024, all companies are focused on productivity. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
It is. So this was now fully 10 years ago. It was little p productivity, not big P
Oh,
productivity, in the sense that it was through sort of self-attestation and workplace effectiveness surveys. We asked point
okay.
blank, same people, within a few months, you used to work over there. Now you work over here. Is it better? Right?
Okay.
And it was not 100%, for sure not.
Hmm.
But by and large, yes, not only at the sort of team level, in particular, people saying that their team dynamics are better largely through having access to different spaces, new technologies,
Hmm.
but
Right.
individually, we saw on the whole maybe 25, 30, 35% average increases in the perceived satisfaction around certain work behaviors. So, making it up, let's say 30% of the population that moved into the floor prior in sort of the old way said that their environment, whether it was an office or desk, whatever they sat, supported their ability to focus. We would
Mm.
move that number by 25, 30, 35%. So maybe now go from
Hmm.
1/3 to 2/3 of the population saying, yes,
Nice.
I have the ability to focus in the workplace now. So again, not 100%, but that was through one iteration. And we were hard pressed to find any other internal program of any kind that had that sort of a leap in the day to day
Right.
experience of the employees in terms of like the friction of getting work done. But then we were also looking for broader organizational measures once the program got to scale. And in particular, in cities where significant percentages of the workforce were in these new environments, so call it
Hmm.
20, 30% of the whole city, we were finding that the average annual sort of engagement scores were
Hmm.
higher for the users in those environments, largely in the areas of sort of enablement. I have access to the places, to the information, to the people, to the tools that help me get my job done.
Hmm.
Sort of 10 or more point improvements on those factors. And then even demonstrably lower voluntary attrition, especially from early tenure staff. And look, I never went to HR and said we caused it, right? It was not causality, but it led
Right.
to a very different conversation with our human resources partners once they started to see numbers moving as dramatically as they were,
Hmm.
with the environment being a variable they had never considered before.
In your mind, from all the experiences you've had since then as well, the weighting between how much that project involved the very focused design of work, in addition to the tools, in addition to the spaces, but also saying, how are they working? And that change management aspect of it, which is saying, Phil, how is Phil working? Where is he working? What does he need? Which most of us have never done. We came into a workplace, we sat beside someone, this quote apprenticeship model sometimes, and some things were taught to us, some things we just picked up. But this very deliberate and documented design of work My sense is that it's all of these elements together, which are so necessary now, leaping ahead, that we need to be thinking about.
Yes. Oh, man. So going from my very first experience with Workplace at Credit Suisse to imminently now, incredibly currently,
Mm,
we're about to publish research that I'm really excited about, and hopefully we'll be able to include in the notes for the show. I've been spending a lot of my time on what McKinsey calls our organizational health framework and organizational
mm,
health index. This is
hmm
possibly the oldest and most distinctive asset that McKinsey has,
Right.
literally 20, just past 20 years old. A survey that sheds a light on the work practices in organizations and how those practices are ultimately tied to performance, because
hmm
we believe that
Right.
sort of how you do things, not how satisfied employees are. That's a critical difference. I get asked
Okay.
a lot about this a lot, coming from the world of engagement and workplace satisfaction questions, asking
hmm
employees, are you happy? Are you engaged? Do you like something? It's very different, this instrument of ours, asking for how frequently or infrequently certain practices are witnessed by employees, and therefore what are the outcomes that they have on the
hmm
organization.
Okay.
Um, so again, this is a 20-year asset for McKinsey, but over the last year and a half, I've been using it to study the behaviors of fully remote companies. So
Okay.
those who
Fully
have
remote.
never had an office, not once,
All right.
born remote, not forcibly remote.
Okay.
And we did that because of all the hemming and hawing about days in the office and return to the office and what's the sort of right version of hybrid or the perfect version of hybrid, because it is impossible to isolate the workplace choice in an employee's holistic experience. Right? You might have two
Sure.
people in the exact same company, exact same role, exact same everything, except one of them gets on well with their manager and the other one does not interpersonally, and therefore one of them is going to have a pretty terrible experience and the other maybe better.
And one person has a kid that they need to pick up from
Yeah, they
school,
got a
and the other one
kid, or
doesn't.
they're not feeling well, or they're a man, or they're a woman, or like you name it. There's a thousand
Yeah.
factors that will influence that person's
Right.
experience.
Right.
So, in the midst of all that back and forth, I said, well, let's look at the fully remote companies, because that's a really interesting opportunity to isolate one variable. Because someone
Okay.
who has signed up to work for a company that has never had an office, not once,
hmm
knows exactly what they're getting into,
Yep.
and everybody has the exact same
Same
experience.
experience.
You work in your home. You have been provided, usually in that case, like pretty good kit in your house. Those companies are very
hmm
generous with technology and chairs and desks and all that thing. And you have nobody ever looking over your shoulder, ever. And what we were really surprised to find was that now, having done this with a few of these companies, one at scale, they are top quartile, if not top decile performers against McKinsey's 20-year experience of measuring organizational
Mm.
health. And at the time that we did these studies, the survey didn't even have the concept of place. There was no question. Like,
Right.
where are you in the office? Are you not in the office? Do you work? It's not a workplace survey. It is an organizational practice survey. And these
Right.
companies did exceptionally well.
Right.
And further review, further research, sort of in broader spectrums of respondents across companies, has shown that if you give somebody flexibility, and this plays back to kind of the Credit Suisse question, if you give someone choice in where they work, either in the office or home to office or when they're working their hours, we
hmm
find that they're about 1.5 times as likely to report positive outcomes for the organization, not just in things like the work environment and their motivation to work, which feels sort of intuitive, but
hmm
also to say that they think the organization is exhibiting kind of innovative and learning oriented patterns and also sets a clear strategic direction. 1.5 times
Ooh.
more likely than the people who don't have that flexibility. But
Okay.
then we go up a step. For the employees who agree with the reason why they are being asked to be on site, whatever on site means for them. It goes from about a 1.5 to 2.5, almost 3 times as likely to report those same 4 positive outcomes. But the real icing on the cake is that for employees who say, like me and my team, we have clearly defined norms and ways of working, not just when and where, but how, the study of work, as you said, it goes to like a 3 or 4 times more likely to say that the company has a positive work environment, that employees are motivated to give their all in pursuit of sort of productivity and performance, that the company is driving innovation and renewing its vision and setting a clear direction and vision to begin with, even if you're sat next to someone all day, every day. So I've been saying very recently, I'm like fully believer now that the ways of working are far more powerful as a tool for organizational performance and experience than where we happen to be working. And like, I wish I knew that 10 years ago. Right. So we had to teach people how to
Right.
use these environments, how to use the tool differently. Even something as simple as, if I'm used to picking up the phone, I know we don't do
Right.
that anymore, but I'm used to picking up a phone. What happens if I move desks, right? You have to teach people how to think differently about these
Right.
things. But now it's sort of from the ways of working in. And I think that the sort of future organization has to be able to operate in a digital or virtual or remote first manner to account for the fact that people are likely to be scattered. And then to use the built environment as an added benefit for certain reasons, right? But we can't like assume that the office is going to give us the performance when we know it's much more about the way we work.
In my journey for 12 years of being in this field, at the beginning, it was about workplace flexibility. And I kept asking people, if you could design the perfect job, what would it look like? And they'd never, ever thought about it. They'd never actually worked out how they work best, where they work best, because if you never had any choice, you don't actually think about it. And that's one of the challenges I do think that we are facing now, this dip in productivity or performance that is perceived as we're trying to learn new ways of working, whereas we're in a very, very different environment. Your experience at JLL and WeWork, I believe, also will have given you a lot more understanding in the change management processes to see how that learning of new ways of working was happening for different types of organizations. You'd learn it all in one particular environment, and then really having a different perspective of large and small organizations. This is so much a people issue, and how much people do and don't understand about how they work or work together as teams.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question. Look, on the whole, like just addressing the hybrid part, I usually say there's sort of 4 ways that companies are showing up in this world right now physically. And let's just start sort of the knowledge worker set.
Yep. Hmm.
Forget the hybrid policy, what they're telling their employees, just how do they present in the world?
Yep.
You've got the I want you here most of the time crew.
Hmm.
And to succeed in that just means you have to have an unbelievable experience on offer for having you there, right? On then the other end of the spectrum, you've got the fully remote set. I don't have an office. That doesn't mean we don't get together. When we get together, we do it transactionally. We use the world. The world is our oyster. But then in the middle, it's actually not one category; it's 2. So there's the ones that are truly hybrid and are strongly suggesting at least some level of presence in a place that they control. But then the other ones that I think is the most interesting typology, and the one that we all should be working towards ultimately, is the kind of virtual first, but not placeless crew.
Right. So the flexible grid.
Yeah, right. Flex, meaning the employee has full autonomy, but the
Yep.
companies can do and like will continue to build and operate facilities for very specific purposes. That group
Hmm.
tends not to call those sites offices. They become more
Right.
studios or experience centers or collaboration hubs or clients, whatever it is.
Yeah. Vista has collaboration.
Yeah, whatever it is. And they are then doing something that I really learned at WeWork, which was like hanging a sign on the door, metaphorically speaking, that says like
Hmm.
this building is meant to do X, Y, Z.
Mm.
And like this is what it's good at, or what we're trying to make it good at. This is what we've designed it for. This is what
Right.
we're critically activating it for. These are the events and the
Mm.
things that are happening here. If you come here for some other purpose, that's cool. We like you. You're welcome to be here all the time.
Right.
And this is like so counter to the problem that most workplaces had before COVID, where we're trying to solve for all needs, all people, all the time. And it
Right.
just doesn't work well for
Yeah.
everybody. So by narrowing the focus and saying, like, this environment is really purpose built when I was at WeWork, our own headquarters, so not a member
Right.
site, like you think of going to a WeWork, but like our office,
Mm.
was wildly oversubscribed. Many more people could have gone there on a database. It was very busy, but the purpose of the place, implicitly stated, was really like product growth, client journeys, tours, and high velocity problem solving, sort of for the strategy of the whole organization. If you
Right.
showed up wanting to be working on a spreadsheet for 8 hours by yourself, it was a terrible place to be. But we
Right.
sort of knew it. We had quiet spaces, and we
Hmm.
would tell employees between meetings, we all have to get our head down sometimes. And we are supporting that activity as best as we possibly can here. It's a generous, quiet space. But candidly, like, don't complain if it's not perfect, because we're not trying to
Right.
engineer this environment to be perfect for that. We're
Yep.
trying to be an A plus on 3 or 4 other things. And for the focus, it's like a strong B at
Right.
best.
Yep.
Clearly defining the purpose of whether you call it an office or whatever of their facility is a an like uncommonly considered unlock, because when we say, I
Hmm.
want you to come into the office, the employee goes, why? And then the employer says, to collaborate. And they'll say, well, what do you think I was doing all of yesterday at home, or for 2 straight years in my house when I couldn't come in? It has to be more authentic, more specific to that company, that culture, like why I think you should come here. But then the onus goes back to the employer.
Right.
Say, make it so that when I'm there, I unavoidably am achieving that objective, both for
Hmm.
us and for me. And if you can't like make that compelling for me, I'm much less likely to think there's a real like return on my commute.
The majority of companies are in the middle, in between the ones who've got it, who are knocking it out of the park, and the other ones who have the conventional legacy ways of doing things. Most of those companies have not committed to what it takes to adapt, which involves so much of this. How should we be working? We've never actually thought about it. Hang on a second. What is the office for? All these different elements. And it's a lot of work, it's a lot of thought when so much around us is changing at an extraordinary pace. What percentage of companies are you finding in your research that have embarked on this journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have some research around this as well from last summer and or the beginning of last year. That I was really thrilled about. Again, faced with exactly that question: like, who's actually doing this? Because we're
Mm,
hearing a lot about the hybrid policies, and the short answer to the question is a lot of people are struggling still, and organizations that I think are very progressive in their approach to workplace are struggling. So we put together a list of 12 best practices that we thought it takes to really deliver a best in class workplace experience. And that came from a mix of my industry experience, our
right,
research, and the clients that we found were being the most transformative.
right.
So, cutting their real estate portfolio in half while having whatever their chosen measure of good,
Right.
employee organizational health or employee satisfaction or performance, something, also
Yep.
continuing to go up while they were cutting offices left and right. So we were looking for
Right.
those kinds of combinations.
Yep.
We put together this list of 12, and then we sent it to just over 50 heads of real estate and workplace experience,
Okay.
known to us, right? So not just a general survey. These were like
Sure.
known individuals, for whom almost all, I'd say this was not their first rodeo.
Right.
Even if the company was not that progressive or perceived to be, these are people who know what they're doing, who are
Yep.
exploring workplace and things like activity based working and utilization before COVID. That was a real key.
Yep. Sure.
And we asked them, how are you doing against this set of sort of 12 things that we think
Right.
really matter? And the results largely broke down into three tranches. The first of which was like everybody was doing the basics. We have, if we didn't have Zoom or Teams or Slack or one of those tools that you need, we've
Right.
done that. We
Yep.
are largely asking employees for how they think about all this. We're surveying them, and that's great. And we we're trying not to be a jerk to the planet. We are embedding sustainability decisions in
Yep.
what we're doing, and telling people to come in when it matters, not all the time.
Hmm.
Great, awesome.
Right.
So almost everybody was doing that. Then, when we started asking questions about sort of the responsiveness of these programs, do you have truly interconnected data sets to make decisions? Do you have workplaces that can evolve as patterns change? Do you have a real ethos of like test and learn mentality? And you
Mm.
started to see cracks in the answers, again, from what is a very progressive set. So they
Yep.
represent the top. And if they were starting to say, oh gosh, this is really hard, that says a lot about sort of what the big fat middle is able to do.
Yes.
And like that kind of planning around uncertainty and not just assuming we're going to get through COVID and make one decision, they're starting to say was really difficult. But then the last category, we didn't structure it this way. It just so happened that the practices that are sort of natural for that fully remote set, the really distributed companies who are
Mm.
teaching their managers to assess performance by real outcomes and not just by presence, people who
Right.
are nominating like executive heads of employee experience or remote
Hmm.
work or virtual work or
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it, what it feels like to work here, and helping their employees like, be productive anywhere. Those kind of qualities of these transformations definitely felt a bit more like advanced calculus to everybody. They're like, oh no, we're not there yet. We are not approaching having kind of single golden source transparent handbooks for how work is supposed to be done. We're not there. We've only
Right.
barely gotten Zoom and
Sure.
Teams, and
Sure.
we're right.
Right.
So like of this progressive set, like solidly a third to a half, once you got into those ways of working in more responsive space, we're saying, no, we're not there yet. And this is an elite group.
Right.
So I'd say of
Okay.
the mass, like that like responsive space problem and focusing on ways of working is where we need to be. And it is also a huge unlock for the real estate providers that are trying to think about what's a new like
Right.
class A facility. We tell a lot of them, you have to help your clients deal with the fact that we're making retail oriented choices about work now, which will not be
Right.
static. They will be, fluid over time. How can you help your clients?
I want to go to the core of that from my perspective. In my first book, I wrote, which came out in 2017, about workplace flexibility and the need for flexibility in order to adapt to business conditions, digitalization, digital transformation, digitalized business operations. And we needed the flexibility to be able to adapt, just as the companies that actually were advanced in how much transformation they had already done when it came to the pandemic, they were much better prepared because they already had decentralized decision making. They knew much more how to work. This need to transform, as the progressive companies are doing, I see that as being inevitable. It is not a choice because of how technology and society, to some degree, how technology, even before AI, is disrupting and changing how we need to work and how much the nature of work has changed. That is what I have come to with all the different work that I've done. That is my core deep belief.
I agree with you.
Phil
Yes.
has nodded his head, but I want you to explain from your perspective, what are the different pillars of that convince you to a greater or lesser degree of that same premise?
Oh man. Yeah, it's funny. I just posted this morning that, and I say a lot, if you Googled future of work and
I saw that
McKinsey or
post.
anywhere else, right? Because I literally used to do this. 10 years ago at Credit Suisse, I was hoarding reports from people like McKinsey who were writing
Yeah.
really great stuff about the future of work. And back then, it was basically automation and like, let's just broadly call it the gig economy. But the full extended version of that
And in
is,
telecommuting.
yeah, like, right, telecommuting to a degree, but like choice in how we consume work. I want a little bit more, maybe I want to do work for a couple different people. Maybe I want to freelance. Maybe I want
Right.
to, even internally, in a big corporation, this concept of sort of agile or like big A agile or
Yes.
like flow to work. So why, if you
Little A
have
agile. Yeah.
yeah, right, like teams of interdisciplinary people who could be pointed to solve all sorts of different kinds of problems as the need arises. Or
Yep.
instead of having a business partner in every one of your shared services functions, you've got a real estate business partner, and you've got an IT business partner, and a finance business partner, HR. Instead of that,
Yep.
wouldn't it be better if you had sort of and again, this was advice to the big corporations, wouldn't it be better if you had pools of that kind of resource, all enabled by technology and all this, that could kind of flow to where the demand is, right? When there's,
The extended talent pool, blended workforce. Yep.
yeah, like that. So that just got me thinking, oh gosh, that is so sort of logical. And as the technology gets better, it will only be easier to do that. And Gen AI has been a little bit of a rude awakening for a lot of people.
Yes.
In saying oh wow, roles or jobs that I thought could only be done by the elite few in the elite locations are quickly being challenged. And there's a connection, like a job that can be done instead of in New York, but in somewhere cheaper in the United States or abroad, could also therefore sort of be done probably remotely, is therefore maybe gigable one day, is maybe AI supported one day.
Or fractionally, yeah.
Fractional, yeah. And
it sounds better than gig.
Yes, and look, gig implying a machine is telling you what to do every day versus I'm choosing to be freelance.
Yep. And spread my risk and have more financial security.
Yeah, and look, it's really difficult to do that in certain countries, in particular mine, that doesn't provide the sort of natural, largely insurance safety net, where maybe in other countries not. But
right.
Strictly speaking, with remote work, it's not just a war for talent between companies anymore. It's between cities, which is why we're seeing remote visas and remote incentive programs, and cities saying, look, I may not be able to keep up with New York in the culture of it all and the history of it all, but I can make this a really attractive place to live, even when you are not working here. And the same problem will apply in reverse to a city like New York. We have to make it compelling and affordable for people to want to live here, even if they're not working for someone who is here.
That was actually a pitch that Scott Stringer, when he was finance chief in New York, he made the pitch about workplace flexibility because he wanted to make sure that it was an attractive place for people to work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that applies to working for the government, but all sorts of, because work is becoming more of a retail choice. Right? We make retail choices about hotels and restaurants. I say a lot, we don't go back to bad restaurants twice.
Yes.
Companies that allow different groups to make their own decision are running a risk, I think, of talent markets. Someone going, I want flexibility, so I'm going to go work over there instead of over here inside the same company. We're seeing states, as a U.S. state says, has telecommuting program. Now you don't necessarily have to live in the capital to work for the state. I can imagine a world one day where, and this might be a crazy thing, but would it be possible to work for the state of New York but not live in the state of New York? I don't know. But if that ever happened and one state said, yes, we have people working for us from other states, then all of a sudden the states are competing with each other. And then the cities, it's the competition is here. And I think those people that allow, those organizations, companies, states, whatever, that allow fluidity in how they can kind of engage with the workforce are going to succeed, because it lets you move faster, try things without failure. It's going to be huge technical hurdles, security, compliance, all that. But it's the direction of travel. And so our consumption of the built environment has to follow suit. It has to be okay that we go to different places for different reasons.
And speaking directly to the blended workforce and the use of the extended talent pool, by that I mean people beyond the dotted edges of a corporation, more use of freelancers and independent contractors and fractional employees to be able to supply the needs with a tight labor market that's very likely to be increasing, and more companies have been doing it over the last 15 years. What are the trends that you're seeing, including since the pandemic, of this? Also because there are so many young people, millennials and Gen Zs, all who have side hustles, mostly for financial security because of this issue of job insecurity, income insecurity, not wanting to be beholden to one employer, and therefore having less of a full-time employee type relationship with the different companies. What are the trends that you're seeing, and what do you anticipate in the future in terms of the extended workforce and how this is likely to evolve?
When I got into workplace, the game was always about collaboration. Like HR, IT, real estate, we're all friends. We collaborate. We try to make as good an experience for working here as we can. Employee, contractor, whatever it is. Now, the three-legged stool isn't good enough anymore. You need someone sort of to be the seat. I don't know how to take that metaphor all the way through. But we're seeing clients really putting together holistic employee experience teams and governance and leaders who are
Nice.
owning this whole journey. They can't run IT and run HR and run real estate and run all the groups operationally, but you can take the sort of strategically minded folks out of those groups to chase the journeys that matter. And we need it because right now there's a really significant gap, I think, in the both sophistication and even excitement level of the person who's responsible for employee experience and the person who's responsible for customer experience at the same company. And we need parity there. And if you obsess about the employee experience, I think it makes you, look, if I do fractional work or freelance, I consulted on my own for a year between WeWork and McKinsey. And, there were 2 or 3 clients where I did a bit of work and then came back and did another little bit of work later. And in order to make that sort of palatable, they had to obviously want to come back and work with me, but also there were ones that were sort of easier to work with. Yeah. Even just the onboarding of it all. Oh, you make it easy for me to plug in and plug out. And so
and get access to the files that you need.
All the stuff. And there are others that were clunky and be like, it's not worth 5 hours of my time just to get going again to do 20 hours of work for you. We will all have our own little Yelp reviews or whatever, and the companies will have their reviews. And just because I like to engage on my own terms doesn't mean I won't go back for experiences that I enjoy. We go back to the same restaurant, same bar, same shows. We like that. Our customers are repeat customers. We can be repeat sort of employees or workers. It is easier than constantly having to hustle for something new, but you got to make it easy for me. And whether it's employee, contract, freelance, that holistic journey of what it feels like to find work with us, to get onboarded to do work with us, to do the work, crystal clear ways of working. If you say, look, this is how you plug in and plug out all day, every day, I would love to come back to a company like that. Even if I work for that company full time, then it makes it easy for me. And it's going to be a huge unlock in the coming years.
Huge. Yes. We do have to, before we get to the end, address the ongoing challenges of companies that are doing the RTO push. And it does typically tend to be, it seems, the very big companies, which I can appreciate. I do understand why it can be harder. You've already made it very clear that even the progressive companies are struggling with different elements. I had hoped at the beginning of this year that we were getting past that. There would be this recognition that this is inevitable. Looking at the non-compliance of employees going to the office, no matter how many days they're mandated, they're not turning up to fulfill those days. What do you see happening over the course of 2024 with some of those companies? You have UPS, who has just said 5 days in the office, March 4th, IBM getting the managers to move and not guaranteeing them any job, even if they move. It's not about those particular companies. But what do you think is going to happen with these companies who are struggling? Maybe their stock price is struggling, their board is taking them to task, and maybe coming up with their hybrid model is the issue. What do you think?
Oh, wow. That's a whole other hour, Sophie.
I know. I would love to do another hour.
I don't think it can stay. There are many reasons why I think these companies are pushing for this. I think they're short-sighted for a number of reasons. And some of the mandates from some companies say, hey, I want you to come back X days per week. And I know from experience or even direct client service, that's more days than they were there before. COVID, like many more days, which makes no
Right.
sense. Exceptions abound. Employees are incredibly sensitive to exceptions. Even larger
Mm,
corporations will say, hey, we're all back in the office, we're hybrid. But of course, yeah, 10% of our workforce will continue to be fully remote. And for some larger corporations, that's 10 or 20 or 30,000 people.
right.
So you're not really back in the way that you were. It doesn't acknowledge how mobile or hybrid you were before COVID. The competition is radically different. The clients
Yeah.
ask, like, what if I enter a city and we say we want people to come into the office in that city and they don't want to? Like, who are we going to lose out to locally? So it's not
Yeah.
about who you're losing out to locally. It's about who that person has the ability to work for, even for a short period of time, anywhere else in the
Right.
world. And
Right.
I think employees appreciate honesty. The clients who have been most transformative for us have had executives saying, not you should come back, but COVID has broken all of our assumptions about work. We're going to just keep trying new things until it gets better. I have no
Yeah.
preconceived notion to say I know the answer.
Right.
We're going to make mistakes along the way, but just
Hmm.
like come on this journey with me while we're exploring. It's much more compelling than the ones who are, again, saying you should come in to collaborate or like we're better when we're together
Hmm.
without anything more specific. And don't even do the courtesy to the employees who, for let's say 2 solid years during the
Right.
pandemic, they
Yeah.
were treating like humans. There was a level of sort of care that was
Yeah.
forced into our corporate culture when it was truly like, are you okay?
Yeah.
And now we're going back to, I want you here just because. I won't say the things that you're thinking, which are maybe I'm a little embarrassed by the amount of space that we're carrying, and I'd like it to be used
Mm.
efficiently. Maybe it is easier for me interpersonally to ask you to come back to a work environment where I personally, as a leader, am more comfortable sort of
Yeah.
exerting power
Yeah.
than, recognizing the different ways, the different demographics like experience this, or ultimately, as you said, changing the way we work is really hard.
Hmm.
No matter all the best tools in the world, it's still kind of hand to hand combat, group by group, culture by culture, process by process. It's hard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
instead of doing the hard thing, we do the easy thing and say, like, let's all go back. But maybe as a final point, very few clients of mine now were the kinds of clients I used to have that were asking to assess what their employees thought about their office. They
Mm.
didn't ask before. So they're saying, like, come back to this place where things were better. But the workplace folks like me are like, well, it wasn't that great for everyone. And I'm not even talking about the gender or racial bias and disparity,
Yeah.
just something as simple as some people sat in a place for 8 hours every day that they didn't like and
Yeah.
didn't help them get their work done. And you're saying, come back because it's better. When the reason they're not coming back is finally they have the ability to vote with their feet and
Yeah.
not go back to the bad restaurant, right? Like
Yeah.
the history
Exactly.
is important.
So, last big question. There's a big commercial real estate vacancy issue.
Yeah.
Write downs, what's going to happen? How quickly do we think that that is possible to find some reasonable solutions to help energize the overall transformation that goes with everybody really getting on board with all of this?
Yeah. Speaking from the McKinsey perspective, we published a significant report over the summer, our real estate practice in partnership with the McKinsey Global Institutes, or our sort of
Hmm.
economic think tank, studying the impact that the pandemic's had on a number of like global superstar cities. And the short of it is, look, hybrid is here to stay. We're not going back. These are systemic changes, and it has radically altered the supply and demand equation for sort of office, for residential, and for
Right.
retail.
Right.
And the major kind of factors that influence like how cities are going to rebound a bit, grossly oversimplifying, has a lot to do with sort of how knowledge oriented is the workforce
Hmm. Sure.
and how like heterogeneous is the urban environment, especially in the downtown.
Okay.
So like New York and San Francisco both have very dramatic like, office oversupply problems, But New York has a slight advantage in that we have a little bit more like heterogeneity in our quote unquote downtowns. We actually have like a couple of places you might call downtown, and people live there in
Okay.
volume. San Francisco, it's like much more tech heavy, much more campus heavy, right? And there's like
Mm-hmm.
not a lot going on downtown by
Okay.
comparison, right? It's like much more office oriented, not as many people like living there.
Got it.
Versus some other like European cities, like Paris or Munich, that not only have more heterogeneity in sort of the downtown, smaller, more mixed use spaces, but not as much dependence on finance, professional services, technology. You've got more like
Right.
heavy industry, other consumer industries. But there's still significant opportunity, even in New York, where we may have maybe 20% too much office. Of the remaining 80%, very little of it is like up to spec. It doesn't
Right.
meet experience goals. It doesn't meet digital goals and community flexibility, sustainability goals. So there's still a lot to do. Like there will be
Yeah.
a hit. Obviously, there's a cliff in leases that maybe people kicked the can on during COVID, but the leading occupiers are seeing that the trophy assets, trophy buildings, like best locations, best connectivity, all that, like are doing better than they've ever done.
Oh,
So
okay.
it is an incredible flight to quality, and hopefully that magnet just like pulls the
Yep.
level up for everybody else. So I'm excited for that change.
For companies who are in the middle and trying to work out how to improve the performance and experience for employees and performance of the business, what now do you recommend that they start with tomorrow? 2 or 3 things to be thinking about very practically.
Yeah, simple one around hybrid, like stop focusing on the inputs, the days in the office, what's the right hybrid, and start thinking about the outputs. You have to be able to assess what someone or a group is doing, with a blindfold on, to unlock all of these things. And generally, look, this change is here. It's happened. We aren't going back. So we should be thinking about the impact on our organizational health, as I mentioned before, that
Mm.
new and different ways of working has. It has been unacceptable for years to have, say, like men and women or older employees, younger employees, like have radically different experiences of what it's like to work there. This is
Mm.
just a new variable. So to the extent that we can study the work practices and the outcomes that are being exhibited and experienced in different parts of the organization based on how people are working and collaborating, where and how, and then identify where things are really humming, figure out what that secret sauce is, like pilot, test, learn, scale those behaviors, and know that this is not a one and done change, right? Like we've
Right.
entered a world of radical retail oriented perception for work, so you got to treat it that way.
Sounds so easy when you say it like
Sounds so easy,
that.
but it's really exciting. I remain an optimist.
Me too. Phil, thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you so much.
Absolute joy to be listening to all these different experiences that you've had and bring from workplace strategy and looking at some of the efficiencies, effectiveness, and the experiences. And I am also very optimistic and love hearing that in you in terms of where we're going. It can be so much better and will be ultimately. It's going to be a little rocky on the way, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you again to Phil Kirschner, Senior Expert and Associate Partner, Real Estate and People and Organizational Performance at McKinsey. You can follow Phil on LinkedIn and follow his work and so much more research in this field at mckinsey.com. Immediate action tip. Stop thinking about inputs, the days in the office, or what's the right hybrid. Focus on outputs and the impact on organizational health. Study work practices and outcomes across your organization based on how people are working and collaborating to figure out the secret sauce. Then pilot, test, learn, and scale those behaviors and keep evolving. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. Why not also write a quick review wherever you listen? For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.